Okay, I'm going to go over two things that we missed today in class. Number one was just making sure you guys understand the basics of what science is and what it's not. I'm going to go through a little bit of the bad science characteristics as opposed to good. And I've covered most of the good ones, what you look for and everything else. It's got to be empirical. It should be published in a peer-reviewed study and be able to stand up to experts in the field really reviewing it. And you also look for reliability, not truth necessarily, because it's not about science being true. It's about science being highly reliable. That's what good science is. A lot of science is somewhere in between, where it's either being developed and they're working on it, or it's just not, highly sound science. And you've kind of got to be able to determine what's what. And one of the types of reasoning that goes on with bad science, and you see it a lot, is a lot of reasoning by analogy. And I'm going to go through that in a bit. Reasoning by single examples. The other thing I'm going to cover today that we didn't get to go through in class today is parallels. I'm going to go over those very quickly and post a sheet on that. Okay? So let me first go through bad science, and then I'll get to parallels, and then I'll get to what you'll expect to see on Wednesday when we start class on Wednesday. Okay? The first thing is on bad science, and I want to show you some characteristics of it and how do you understand it. How do you know when it's bad? Okay? Look for a type of reasoning that's based on analogy is one marker that you'll get with bad science writing. You can get it with good science writing. You can get reasoning by analogy, and it usually involves people talking from one example or from personal experience. And what they try to do is universalize it. There's some kind of implied universality to what they're talking about. And what good scientific method should do is wipe out those individual examples. If one case turned out badly, it doesn't mean it's a bad idea in most cases. Now, something I've mentioned before is about vaccines, where this is an area where a lot of bad science is being promoted. This idea that vaccines cause a problem. And this is an example. I had to dig this one up. It wasn't that hard to find it because there's a lot of this silliness out there. And I want to go through a few of the things to look for. Number one, this guy is actually a doctor writing it. You can see his name right here. He actually is a doctor, apparently a medical doctor. And it's something to look for. If somebody has a medical practice or something like that, that's actually an example of somebody who's an expert in the field. So, what could be wrong with that? The problem is experts aren't inherently right, and you should not ever inherently trust somebody just because they have a degree in an area. They can still lie. Remember the big thing. Just because, somebody, acts tough doesn't mean they are. This guy has the credentials to be a good scientist. He's a medical doctor. But it doesn't mean that what he says is going to necessarily be good. Remember, you're looking for scientists who aren't afraid to step in the ring with other scientists. Is what he's saying really being supported by what other doctors and other medical practitioners would advocate? And the problem with this article is, no, it's not. And it doesn't take much searching to find out that the vast majority of doctors actually support vaccines. And one of the things Griffith Jones does is he relies on analogy. This is really bad writing. He says he relies on daily doses of vitamin C. I won't go into the whole vitamin C thing. That was one of the issues I got into, an argument with over email with Debbie Blanchard. Vitamin C has no reliable health benefits when it comes to preventing things like colds, flus, and things like that. It just doesn't. It doesn't hold up. I won't go into that entirely yet. I might go into it a little bit later on. So he uses that, but just because he uses that, again, he's using analogy. He says, I don't get the flu shot. I reply, I don't. I rely on high doses of vitamin C to build up my immune system. By the way, you need to be really clear. Vitamin C does not build up your immune system. It just doesn't. So just because he does it, though, doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. But it doesn't mean it's wrong either. But he's starting to ring the bells of bad science. He also brings up there's no such thing as a 100% safe surgery. And of course there isn't. There's no 100% safe vaccine. There's no 100% safe surgery. There's no 100% safe anything. And one of the things he's doing is not talking about the trade-off. If you get the vaccine, there are some risks associated with it. Allergies and other things can be risks. If you don't get the vaccine, it does not mean you eliminated the risks. You have instead accepted other risk factors, which are catching the diseases, okay, that the vaccines would hopefully make you more resistant to. So that he doesn't go into. So he looks at one side of the risk factor without looking at the other. The risks of not getting vaccines for the flu are much higher than the risks associated with the vaccine, especially because of that thing I told you about with you can be somebody who passes it on to somebody who could die from it. So that's what he's doing here. And then he gets to a typical parent story. Well, it's not really typical. This is more reasoning by analogy. And those are the key markers of bad science. And this entire article is filled with that kind of reasoning on these kind of things. They have a little editor's note at the bottom. This column does not constitute medical advice. It's nowhere even close to it. What I would urge you to do on something like this is talk to a medical practitioner, or actually talk to more than one. You are not, as a student, usually in the position of being an expert yourself to evaluate this, but you want to be able to know whether or not you're being given reasonable scientific advice, and health is a scientific field. Psychology is, health is, physics is, other fields are. These are, scientific fields. In order to figure out where you're going to get a better level of reliability, try to find multiple people with credentials in the field who are also giving advice along the same direction. If you're running into experts in the field who are not afraid to step in the ring, and they're all telling you one thing, you probably have good advice. You're more likely to have it. And again, notice I don't tell you that there's one way to do it. What you're looking for in science is peer review. In other words, most experts are going in the same direction on this issue. Sometimes you don't have clear peer agreement. Sometimes you don't have what they call scientific consensus on things. On the vast majority of vaccines, you do have consensus that these are generally a highly reliable thing, and they are a good idea. You reduce the risks on one side to a great degree. You accept some risks in a smaller degree on the other side. Okay, flu vaccines carry very small risk. Passing on the flu, remember we had 80,000 deaths last year. That's a real threat. When you weigh that against the number of illnesses that people got from the flu vaccine, you can see that you're getting a distortion if you have people trying to push you away from the vaccine. So look for the consensus if you can find it, or look for highly reliable people not afraid to step in the ring. This guy obviously is not. He's writing in a newspaper where he's not going to expose himself to getting roasted by other doctors nearly as much. Okay. The Huffington Post is one of the other sources I told you has a serious problem. You'll notice when you look through, and this is what's going on this morning, they have a lot of sources that are based on, and this was a little sketchy thing I noticed about them. Let me get rid of my picture here and just go to this. Notice the nature of the articles. These are advice and political articles. This is a political article, and it's in the health section on Hillary Clinton and abortion. Why you should really be asking what's really in your foods. And notice this looks like a health article, but notice what Huffington Post is actually doing. It's presented by Panera Bread. It's an advertisement. I can't emphasize how unprofessional this is of Huffington Post. This is the Huffington Post, by the way. I should move that into it. And they mix in these articles that are really advertisements in with articles that are really just really sketchy articles of personal advice. This is another one, advertisement by Health Nation. And notice how easy it is to miss that. And then Jane Fonda and Megyn Kelly. This is not so much health advice as it is just advertising and lots of analogies. And you notice this one. This one looks like good science, and I almost fell for it. It's an advertisement by a publication, Health Nation. That's a publication. They're selling ads. So here I am back again. So I want you to note how bad Huffington Post is. And they're more of a left-wing publication. Fox is just as bad with conservative type news and really atrocious health news. Same type of stuff. This one's an okay one on rat lungworm, but it's not really much of a risk to most people. And notice that they focus on a lot of this woman's kidney, rugby player who swallowed a garden slug. This is, I think this was the only one I found that was actually reasonable, good health advice, and this one's okay too. This is, the number, but then I, found issues with it. The number one food poisoning cause, it's chicken, and by the way, it is reliable. I won't get into how we know, but chicken and poultry, especially chicken, hands off a lot of salmonella. I think they have reasonable numbers here, and get into Center for Disease Control. These are actually good sources for information, but they're more general. They're not research. But notice what they do. It's a nutritious and healthy protein that's perfect for dinner. That's actually somewhat sketchy, that claim. But that's okay. People can disagree on that. But notice when they say, here's the proof, what is it? They actually send you to Taste of Home. That's a sister publication of Fox News. They own this publication. So they're basically just pushing more ads is what they're doing, and they're sending you to a bunch of recipes. That's not scientific proof. I don't know how much I can overemphasize that. They just sent you to another set of advertising. That's the problem with Fox News. It really is not a reliable source for science. It's quite sketchy, and they're oftentimes selling something. Keep in mind that science is, like everything else, an industry, and you'll have folks trying to make money off of it in one way or another. Now, one of the areas where I do think they are more reliable, and there are a number of publications that are reliable out there, but we're using primarily the New York Times. And the reason is this, and this is something I pointed out once before, and it's something I want you to look for. This one was one of the, and this is what I just opened right now, The Mysteries of Animal Movement. This one's an okay one. This one isn't great, but it basically works not from analogy. He recounts this without a trace of embarrassment, just published. He is a scientist in the field. This is a book published in a scientific journal, Princeton University Press. Notice again, they're not pushing advertisement. So you're getting better stuff here. You're getting things where you're not getting people who are blatantly looking to make money off of advertising and other things. You're getting somebody who actually has a reputation on the line within science. Now, again, I want to emphasize, just because somebody's working from a university, and this is the press, Princeton University Press, doesn't make a lot of money off their publications. They make very little. They're an academic press. And that's why universities tend to be more reliable sources. More reliable. It doesn't mean they're certain. You never have certainty in science. You have degrees of reliability. And in universities, reliability is tantamount, is absolutely essential. Now, he's being kind of silly here, but this is a slightly better source because, again, they're going back to universities. This one is, and again, I'm just going through, I can do this one. This is one some of you guys actually wrote on, where the spots came from. And this is a new report published Wednesday in Nature. Notice he describes the article, but he always goes back to, again, the reporter you can't rely on in and of himself. What he's doing is going to an actual peer-reviewed journal. That's what you look for. I do not expect you guys to read peer-reviewed journals. These things are extremely difficult to read. You really have to be an expert in the field. Okay, and I don't expect you to be that way. I'm not an expert in, This is paleontology. I can't read the original articles very well. They're over my head. But I'm looking for it, the writers of these things, I'm looking for they're enough of an expert that they're willing to step in the ring with the other experts in the field. That's what that one guy who wasn't willing to do. He wasn't willing to step in the ring. This guy isn't. He's doing this at the Sun, the Toronto Sun. He's basically taking on kindergartners. What this guy is doing is publishing in Nature, and we can go ahead and go to this one, and I'll go to another publication in Nature. He is willing to step in the ring with other experts in the field. He might not be right. He might not. They might expose problems in it, but the experts are the ones who are going to be able to do it, not the reporter, and certainly not common people who are not experts in the field. Look for people who are willing to step into the ring, and then look for if these things are playing out. So he's willing to step in the ring with the experts. Now, this article you can't get to because it's in Nature. By the way, if you're at a university, they buy subscriptions to these. So the universities get into these, and if you're at a university, you can get into it. By the way, and Victor Valley College can get you into this. You can use the college's resources to get into Nature, and so you can get the full article. So that's what you're looking for in good science. That is what you are not getting from Huffington Post nor from Fox News. But publications like Nature, and this is the journal Nature Online, and again, you have to go probably through the VVC library to get access to it. But these are all peer-reviewed articles, people who are willing to step in the ring with the experts in the field, okay, and write about things like quantum mechanics, collective dimensional charges. Boy, that's totally over my head. But this kind of stuff is when you're getting good information. Be careful. So I'm not telling you not to read, health information out there, but look for folks who actually have, credentials behind their name and are willing to step in the ring with the big folks. Look to see if something's actually backed up by other folks. If they're making extraordinary claims, they should have extraordinary evidence. If you think vitamin C is going to fight the flu or pneumonia or cancer or AIDS, like some of these imbeciles like Debbie Blanchard, that's an extraordinary claim. And there happens to be absolutely no reliable evidence to back any of it up. Okay? So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye out for it. Don't look for certainty, but look for some level of reliability. Okay? Now let me go through the next thing. So that's what I wanted you to know about good and bad science. Don't look for certainty, and don't just trust somebody because they have a degree behind their name. Look for reliability and that they can do things again and again and again, and that they're not afraid to step in the ring with the big boys. Okay? Now let me step out of this, and I'm going to post this. I'm going to send this out as an email. Send it out as an attachment, and I'll put it outside my door, and I'll put it up in the assignments area. So I'm going to send it out as an email. Let me put myself back in here. I'm going to send it out as through an email through Blackboard, and I'm going to attach it to the email. But I'm also going to attach this thing, or I'm going to post it in the assignments area, so you can get it there or through the attachment. And I'm also going to put this outside my door. So everybody should have this. This is on parallels, and it's paralleling the verb phrase. Okay? Paralleling the verb phrase. Some of you do this every now and then. All of you should be able to do it all the time. Okay? Parallels are any time you repeat a grammatical structure. Any grammatical structure. Now, I spoke briefly on this on last week on Wednesday, on repeating apples, bananas, and pears, on just repeating nouns. That's the simplest form of parallel. And you guys do those already. Those are easy to do. But you can use and, but, and or. And you can use and, but, and or in any way here. And I want you to repeat the verb phrase. Now, in this example, the bus driver was smoking a cigarette. Was smoking is the verb phrase. Now, you need to repeat the phrase somehow. What you can do is repeat the main verb. You can repeat the whole phrase. Most people just want to repeat the main verb. This is why I've emphasized this all along. And so we can do this now. The bus driver was smoking a cigarette. That's the same sentence. But notice I repeated, I paralleled the verb phrase. I repeated the main verb, or excuse me, I paralleled the main verb along with the prepositional phrase on the end. The bus driver was smoking a cigarette and talking to the passengers. The bus driver is the subject. The verb is was smoking and talking. So I repeated the ing verb. That's the main verb. That's what I did. Same thing here. The bartender was pouring is the subject and verb. This is why being able to isolate them is so important. You can now parallel them. So we want to parallel pouring. You can parallel was pouring. The bartender was pouring whiskey for Dougie, but flirting with Susie. Flirting is paralleling pouring. I could say was flirting, and then I'm paralleling the entire verb phrase. And I could say was talking. I just think that sounds funky. That's my shit detector says you don't need to do that. But notice I've added onto each one. Each sentence is now about a third longer, if not twice as long, but at least a third longer, and more detailed and more precise, just by paralleling the verb. The bus driver was smoking a cigarette is how it started, and was talking to the passengers is me adding more detail. The bartender was pouring the whiskey for Dougie is the independent clause. That's the sentence at the start. But now it's but was flirting with Susie. I added a lot more detail to it. I have them doing two different things now. That bartender is doing two different things. The bus driver is doing two different things. And so what you want to do is parallel all these verbs. This one's pretty easy. This is actually a linking verb. The muffins looked great. That's a linking verb. But tasted terrible. But tasted is a parallel of the verb. The muffins looked good and tasted great. I just paralleled the verb. I have the muffins, getting described two different ways. And then you can parallel was speaking. Have the mayor do two different things. Would always forget. Would forget is what Dougie does. Have Dougie do something else. And he does this. The Giants should defeat the Dodgers easily. Of course they should. And have something else happen. But blah, blah, blah. And just have the Giants do two different things. Okay? That's what you want to do with this sheet and bring it to class on Wednesday. All right? And we will have, you do need to bring a science article from the New York Times. You were supposed to have that today. Have that science article with the topics in the margin, and I'm going to have you write an in-class paragraph on Wednesday. Everybody needs to bring a science article and write an in-class paragraph on Wednesday. Okay? That's where we are. Take care.